Chapter 6. The Upstairs Light. Upstairs, the building had settled into quiet. The low hum of evening had softened, voices fading, doors closing, the small rhythms of daily life drawing gently toward rest. In the living room, a single lamp cast a warm glow across the sectional couch. James sat tucked into the corner, one leg folded beneath him, the other stretched out along the cushion. Barney rested comfortably beside him, his head heavy across James's lap. James's hand moved absently along the dog's neck, a slow, familiar rhythm. Across from him, Pearl sat cross-legged, a length of soft yarn gathered in her hands as she worked steadily. Hook, loop, pull. Row by row, a small blanket began to take shape. They sat in companionable silence for a while, not empty, just lived in. "It's been a busy few days," James said at last. Pearl didn't look up immediately, counting stitches in her head before responding. "Yes," she said quietly. "It has." James glanced toward her. "You brought home another one." Pearl paused, then looked up, a hint of a smile reaching her eyes. "I didn't bring her home," she said gently. "She found her way." James gave a small hum. "That's not how it usually looks from my end." Pearl's smile deepened just slightly. "When I was younger," she said, "it was cats and dogs." James chuckled softly. "I remember hearing stories." Pearl glanced back down at her work. "They always had a way of showing up when something wasn't quite right," she said. "Thin, hurt, needing something steady." She paused, her hands slowing just slightly. "I suppose that hasn't really changed." James looked at her more closely now. "Just different kind of strays?" Pearl nodded once. "Yes." She set the crochet work in her lap for a moment. "There are so many people out there," she said quietly, "carrying more than they know what to do with." Her voice didn't rise, didn't push. It simply stated what she had come to understand. "I don't think it's an accident," she continued. "The ones who cross our path." James didn't interrupt. He never did when her thoughts were unfolding like that. "I keep thinking about what Jesus said," Pearl added after a moment, "about how what we do for others, we're really doing for Him." Her eyes lifted briefly. "I don't always know exactly what someone needs." A small pause. "But I can see when they need something." Barney shifted slightly, settling deeper into James's side. James ran his hand across the dog's head again, thoughtful. "It's different," he said after a while. Pearl looked at him. "How so?" James leaned back slightly, considering. "Before all this," he said, gesturing lightly around the space, "it felt like we were just working to stay ahead of things." Pearl nodded. "Bills, schedules, routine." He gave a small shrug. "Nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't much more than that." He looked toward her again. "This," he added, "it feels like something that actually matters." Pearl held his gaze for a moment. Then she smiled. Not broadly, just enough. "It does matter," she said quietly. James nodded. "The way people connect here," he continued, "the way they look out for each other, that didn't happen by accident." Pearl didn't answer right away. She picked up the yarn again, her hands resuming their steady rhythm. "No," she said softly, "it didn't." They sat like that for a while longer, the quiet between them filled with understanding that didn't need to be spoken again. Eventually, Pearl set the blanket aside. "That's enough for tonight," she said. James shifted, gently moving Barney's head from his lap as he stood. "Come on, boy." Barney stretched, then followed without hesitation. As they moved toward the hallway, Pearl paused. "Don't forget about Mr. Norris in the morning," she said. "I'll see him first thing tomorrow," James said with a smile. True to his word, the following morning found him standing outside Mr. Norris's apartment. James knocked lightly on the door before stepping back half a pace. He didn't have to wait long. The door opened with a small, deliberate motion, revealing a man who carried his years with ease rather than weight. "Morning," the man said. "Mr. Norris," James replied. "Heard you were having a bit of trouble with that closet door." Edward Norris gave a faint smile. "Seems to have developed a mind of its own," he said. "Figured it was time to admit defeat." James chuckled softly. "Happens to the best of us." The apartment was tidy, not overly arranged, just lived in. A guitar rested on a stand near the window, catching the morning light. A small desk nearby held a laptop and a modest setup that looked just a step beyond casual use. James noticed it without commenting, then moved toward the closet. "Let's see what we're dealing with," he said. Edward stepped aside, watching with mild interest as James opened and closed the door a few times, testing the hinge. "It's been sticking a bit," Edward said, folding his arms loosely. "Just enough to be annoying." James nodded. "That's usually how it starts." He crouched slightly, studying the alignment. "Not too serious," he added. "We'll get it sorted." Edward gave a soft hum of approval, then settled into one of the chairs nearby. 3 years now," Edward said after a moment. James glanced up. "Since you moved in?" Edward nodded. "First tenant Pearl had, if I remember right." James smiled faintly. "That sounds about right." Edward leaned back slightly. "Didn't expect to stay this long," he said. "But then, didn't expect a lot of things, truth be told." James tightened a screw, listening. "I had a place before this," Edward continued. "Larger, quieter, in the wrong kind of way." A small pause. "This is different." James glanced over briefly. "In a good way?" Edward gave a small, knowing smile. "In the best way." James straightened the hinge and tested the door again. It moved more easily this time. "I picked the guitar back up not long after I came here," Edward said, his eyes drifting toward the instrument near the window. James followed the glance. "You play?" "Used to," Edward said, "back when I was young enough to think it might turn into something." A faint trace of humor touched his voice. "Had a band for a while, played here and there." "What happened?" James asked. Edward shrugged lightly. "Life," he said. "That was all." James nodded. "Has a way of doing that." Edward leaned forward slightly. "But something about this place," he continued, "gave me the time to pick it up again." He gestured toward the guitar. "Wasn't planning on anything serious, just something to pass the time." James adjusted the hinge one last time, then stepped back to test the door again. Smooth. No resistance. "Neighbour next door," Edward said, as if picking the thread back up. "Young fellow, Joshua." James nodded. "I know him." "Accountant," Edward added. "Sharp mind." A small smile formed. "He heard me playing one evening, said his grandmother used to love that kind of music." James leaned lightly against the doorframe, listening now. "He told me," Edward continued, "that there are people out there who don't hear it much anymore. Said I should put it online." James raised an eyebrow slightly. "And you did?" Edward gave a quiet nod. "Took some convincing, and some help getting set up. Equipment, camera, all of that." He gestured vaguely toward the desk. "That was mostly him." "And now?" James asked. Edward's expression settled into something quietly satisfied. "Now I play a few nights a week," he said. "Go live. Old country songs, the kind that used to fill every room." A small pause. "Turns out, there are still folks who want to listen." James smiled. "I imagine there are." Edward nodded. "Not a large crowd, but steady." He paused, then added, "Enough to make it worth doing." A moment of quiet settled between them. "Funny thing," Edward said. "At my age, I didn't expect to start something new." He looked toward the window briefly. "But that's what this place has done." James met his gaze. "It tends to do that." Edward nodded. "Yes," he said. "It does." James stepped back fully from the closet. "That should hold now," he said. "If it gives you any more trouble, let me know." Edward stood slowly, not strained, just measured. "I appreciate that." He reached for the door, opening it and closing it once more. A small nod. "That's taken care of." They moved toward the entrance together. As Edward reached for his cap, he paused. "Rent day," he said, almost as an aside. James gave a small smile. "She'll be downstairs." Edward nodded. I'll go see her now." The door opened, and the hallway beyond carried its usual quiet life, soft movement, distant voices, the sense of something shared but unspoken. Edward stepped out, closing the door behind him with care, and with that he made his way toward the office.